My name is Silas Hawthorne, and for 7 long years, my son's wife, Brielle, treated me like I was something she found stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoe. She seated me with her 6-year-old nephew at the formal holiday dinners. She called me a fossilized economic burden in front of 20 family members on Christmas Eve. She once humiliated me at a public library for having a book with a cracked spine. She instructed my grandchildren that their grandfather was a cautionary tale in poor life choices. But Brielle made one fatal mistake. She assumed the worn-out, retired mechanic in the hand-me-down coat was exactly who I appear to be. She never asked why I chose to live in a cramped, $700 a month apartment. She never wondered why I drove a battered 15-year-old pickup truck. She never questioned why I accepted her constant, quiet contempt with silent dignity. When that Christmas text arrived, I stopped pretending entirely. I booked a one-way flight to Zurich and claimed my inheritance, a trust fund worth 37 million Swiss francs. If you're watching this, please subscribe right now and let me know where you're watching from, because you're about to witness the most expensive family lesson ever taught. This is the story of how I transformed from the embarrassing grandfather into international headlines in 72 hours flat. To understand what happened, you need to know how deeply my daughter-in-law, Brielle Sutton Hawthorne, despised me. I raised my son, Julian, alone after his mother, Eliza, passed away from an illness 27 years ago. He was 5 years old. I worked double shifts at the General Motors assembly plant in Detroit, Michigan, putting in 60-hour weeks, making sure he had everything he needed. We were not rich, but we were never poor in spirit. We had integrity, and we had each other. Julian grew up to be a brilliant, hardworking man. He earned a degree in finance, secured a prestigious role at Sterling and Reed Asset Management, eventually earning a salary of $180,000 a year. Then he married Brielle. Brielle Sutton came from old money, West Coast blue blood wealth. Her father owned a chain of 5 upscale hotels. She was a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, drove a $90,000 electric sedan, and made it crystal clear from the day I met her that I was a living, breathing anachronism, a stain on her meticulously crafted social image. But I did not understand how absolute her contempt was until Thanksgiving 2023. I arrived at their 4,000 square foot house in Bloomfield Hills with a simple pumpkin pie I had baked myself. Nothing fancy, but it was made with love and was what I could afford after buying the ingredients. Brielle took one look at the slightly cracked crust and said, "Oh, Silas, we have professional pastry chefs handling the desserts this year. That is quaint." Then came the seating arrangement. "Silas," she announced to the assembled family and her parents, "we have saved you a very special spot." She pointed to a small side table in the corner of the dining room where her 6-year-old nephew, Leo, and her 4-year-old niece, Charlotte, were already seated. I looked around. There were 20 adults at the main mahogany table. Brielle's entire family, Julian's colleagues, everyone staring with pity or mild amusement. "I think there is a small mix-up," I said quietly, trying to maintain my composure. Brielle offered that sharp, cold smile of hers. "No mix-up, Silas. The children adore their grandpa. Do you not, Leo?" My grandchildren, Emmett and Clara, who were 7 and 9, looked embarrassed and refused to meet my eye. They knew something was terribly wrong. I sat at that children's table for 3 hours, eating my professionally catered turkey while the adult conversation about mergers and luxury travel sailed over my head. I was not invited to contribute a single word. But that was not the worst of it. As I was leaving, I overheard Brielle talking to her mother in the hallway. I was putting on my worn canvas jacket by the front door when I heard her voice carry. "Thank God that is over," Brielle sighed dramatically. "I told Julian we need to establish stricter boundaries. The children are starting to ask questions about why Grandpa looks like he dressed out of a lost and found box. I'm so tired of having to explain his genetic baggage." Her mother chuckled. "Well, he certainly does not carry the Sutton name with distinction." "Exactly," Brielle continued. "My clients think we are secretly supporting a relative. I had to explain that he is Julian's father, not mine. I cannot be responsible for his antiquated worldview and financial incompetence." antiquated worldview, and financial incompetence. I recorded that entire conversation on my phone. I still have it. For months later came my granddaughter Clara's 9th birthday party. Brielle invited 15 families from Clara's exclusive $5,000 a month private academy. I showed up with a gift I had carefully selected, a $45 high-quality watercolor set, wrapped myself in paper I had bought on clearance the year before. When the other parents, all impeccably dressed and radiating generational wealth, asked who I was, Brielle introduced me simply as Julian's father. No name, no relationship to the children, just Julian's father. One woman, wearing a blazer that likely cost more than my monthly Social Security, asked politely, "Oh, are you retired from management?" Before I could answer truthfully, Brielle jumped in, her voice dripping with careful condescension. "Silas is retired from the assembly line." The way she said assembly line made it sound like I was describing a contagious, terminal disease. Later, I overheard her explaining my presence to another mother. "We are trying to teach the children about socioeconomic diversity. You know, how blue-collar labor contributes to the service sector." I had spent 50 years meticulously building the very machines these people drove. I had put my son through college on those wages. But to Brielle, I was nothing more than an abstract concept, the help, a piece of charity she dragged out once a year to look progressive. That evening, Julian called me, his voice tight. "Dad," he started hesitantly, "Brielle feels like you do not really fit in with our social circle. Our clients are always around. Our social circle. She thinks it might be better if you visit when it is strictly family time, Dad. No big events. Maybe just Sunday mornings." I kept quiet. What could I possibly say? That his wife viewed me as a shameful, working-class ghost haunting her lavish life? "I'm taking notes, son," I finally replied. Mental notes. Financial notes. Notes that my mother's words kept echoing in my mind. "Promise me, Silas, you will live simply, but remember who you are." I was beginning to realize that I had forgotten, and I was starting to pay the price. By December 2024, the financial and emotional pressure was crushing me. My landlord at the Maplewood Garden Apartments sent a notice. My rent for the 500 square foot unit, which had been $700 a month for a decade, was jumping to $925 starting January 1st. A $225 increase I simply could not absorb. My monthly Social Security check, after all the deductions, was only $1,755. After paying the new rent, utilities, and covering basic groceries, I would be left with maybe $50 a month if I was lucky. I had been living in that cramped apartment for 13 years. Beige walls, brown carpets stained by time, a tiny galley kitchen barely fit for one. But it had been my sanctuary. The notice sat on my chipped Formica kitchen table for 3 weeks while I tried to budget a way out. I could not ask Julian for help. Brielle had explicitly made it clear that my financial problems were an embarrassment to their family legacy. The previous year, when I mentioned my 15-year-old pickup needed a new transmission, a $750 repair, she had told Julian, "Your father needs to learn to manage his fixed income better. Perhaps fewer baked goods and more investment portfolios." $750 for a major repair on a high-mileage vehicle was not poor budgeting. It was the stark, unrelenting reality of aging poverty. The stress was not just financial, it was existential. My doctor, Dr. Alana Reyes at the Community Health Clinic, ran a series of tests after I began experiencing alarming, sharp chest pains in October. My blood pressure had spiked to 185/115. She prescribed 3 different medications, 2 of which I simply could not afford. "Mr. Hawthorne," she advised me gently, her eyes full of concern, "this level of chronic stress can trigger a major cardiac event. You must find a way to reduce the pressure in your life immediately." Reduce the pressure? How do you explain to a doctor that your daughter-in-law treats you like a shameful family secret? That your successful son chooses silence and self-preservation over defending his own father? That you are one rent increase away from having nowhere to go? The most critical medication cost $95 a month with my limited insurance plan. I started carefully cutting my pills in half, hoping to stretch the prescription and the budget. But there was something else eating at me, deeper than money or health. I was disappearing. When Emmett and Clara looked at me, I saw an awful pity in their young eyes, 9 and 7 years old, and they already understood that their grandpa was a failure. Clara asked me once, during a quiet visit, "Grandpa, why do you not live in a big, safe house like Mommy and Daddy?" Before I could formulate an honest reply, Brielle swept in, her smile plastic. "Because Grandpa prioritized different things, sweetheart. Some people value working with their hands over intellectual pursuits, but that is their choice." The way she delivered the line made my life's work, my entire identity, sound like a foolish, catastrophic failure. Emmett started pulling away faster when I went in for a hug. They were internalizing the lesson that their grandfather was someone to be ashamed of. That realization that my grandchildren, Eliza's grandchildren, were being taught that my love was devalued because my bank account was small hit me harder than any rent notice. But Brielle did not know everything about my bank account. She did not know about the heavy, oak-stained memory chest under my bed, the one I had never once opened. The one my mother made me swear to keep hidden unless I truly had no other path. "Promise me you will live simply, but remember who you are." 32 years I had honored that promise. Lived simply, worked hard, raised my son with dignity. But the time to remember who I was and what I had truly inherited was coming faster than I thought. December 8th, 2024. Clark Street Market, 3:15 p.m. on a brisk Sunday afternoon. I was in the grocery store using my state assistance card to purchase food for the next week. $73.14 worth of food. Marked down poultry, store-brand dry beans, a small bag of frozen vegetables. Nothing glamorous, but it was sustenance. I handed the young cashier, a student maybe 19 years old, my electronic benefits card, the same way I had done countless times. She smiled politely as she processed the transaction. That is when I heard the voice I see, carrying authority. Oh, how absolutely embarrassing. I turned around slowly. Brielle Sutton Hawthorne, my daughter-in-law, stood 2 people back in line, her designer handbag clutched in perfectly manicured hands, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost close to $3,000. Our eyes met across the lane. "Hello, Brielle," I said quietly. "Just buying your essential foodstuffs." "I see," she said, her voice dripping with implication. The people between us, sensing the heavy, hostile tension, shuffled uncomfortably to the side. The cashier slowed her scanning, obviously listening intently. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Just buying groceries." Brielle moved closer, her voice dropping to what she clearly intended as a discreet whisper, though it carried across the entire checkout area. "With our tax dollars, I assume." The cashier's head snapped up sharply. An elderly woman behind Brielle made a small sound of distress. I kept my voice absolutely steady. "I paid income taxes for 50 years, Brielle, on every single paycheck." "Clearly not enough," she returned, folding her arms. The silence in that line was deafening. For strangers were watching this entitled woman publicly shame a 69-year-old man for buying basic food. I finished the transaction without another word, picked up my 2 plastic bags, and walked toward the exit. Brielle called after me, loud enough for a dozen people to hear. "Perhaps you should try shopping somewhere more appropriate for your financial situation, Silas." I stopped. I turned around. The old Silas, the one who had spent 3 decades keeping the peace, would have kept walking, would have swallowed the humiliation and pretended it did not matter. But something had fundamentally shifted. "Brielle," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension. "You know absolutely nothing about my situation." I walked out of that store with my head held high, but when I reached my truck in the parking lot, my hand was shaking so hard I could barely unlock the door. I sat there for 15 minutes, staring at the steering wheel of my battered 15-year-old pickup, the one Brielle had once dismissed to Julian as a blight on the neighborhood aesthetics. That is when I made the first call. I dialed Julian's number. "Dad, what is up? You sound stressed." "Your wife just publicly humiliated me in a grocery store." I told him, the words raw. Silence. "What happened, Dad?" I recounted the entire incident. The state benefits, her comments about tax dollars, the suggestion that I shop somewhere more appropriate. More silence followed. Finally, Julian sighed. Dad, I'm sure she did not mean anything by it. She gets stressed. Did not mean anything by it. Julian, she called my grocery shopping embarrassing in front of complete strangers. She made a scene. Look, Dad, Brielle is under intense pressure with year-end fund allocations and holidays approaching. Maybe you could try shopping at different times? When it is less likely you will run into people we know. People we know. My successful, well-compensated son was asking me to hide my poverty so his wife would not suffer social discomfort. Are you suggesting I time my basic necessity shopping around your wife's high society calendar? I asked. That is not. Look, Dad, let's just try to keep the peace, okay? For the kids' sake. For the kids' sake. I hung up the phone. That night, I cannot sleep. I kept turning over my mother's dying words. Remember who you are? But I had forgotten, had I not? Somewhere along the line, I had allowed Brielle's cruel, small-minded version of me, the poor old man, the embarrassment, the economic burden to become the uncomfortable truth. The heavy, oak-stained memory chest sat under my bed, exactly where I placed it 32 years ago, waiting. I got up at 3 in the morning and pulled it out, heavy and dusty. It was secured with ancient leather straps my mother had carefully fastened in 1992. I held it in my hands for almost 2 hours, tracing the lines of the wood. Then I put it back. Not yet, but soon, because Brielle Sutton Hawthorne had no idea who she was truly messing with, and neither did my son. The man they thought they knew was about to stop existing entirely. I need to tell you about my mother. Evelyn Margaret Hawthorne passed away on a chilly evening in March 1992 at St. Joseph's Regional Hospital in Detroit. Pancreatic cancer took her at the age of 62. I was 37 then, standing by her bed with my 5-year-old son, Julian, sleeping deeply in the visitor's chair. She had been unconscious for 3 days when, suddenly, her eyes snapped open. Silas, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the life support machines. I'm here, Ma, I replied, leaning close. She gripped my hand with surprising, desperate strength. Listen carefully. There is no time. Under my bed, the chest. The old oak chest. Do not open it unless you absolutely must. Her breathing was labored, but her eyes were intense, more focused than they had been in weeks. Ma, what are you talking about? Your grandmother, Helga. She fled Basel, Switzerland, in 1941. We changed our name and everything when we came to America. This was absolutely news to me. I had grown up believing we were simple, working-class Americans 3 generations back. What was our name? Von Ritter. Helga von Ritter Hawthorne. There are legal papers, documents, letters from attorneys in Switzerland. I never opened them after 1983. She coughed, a thin spray of blood on her lips. Why not? Her grip tightened again. Because I chose to be American. Simple. Working class. I wanted you to grow up normal, Silas. Away from that. The heart monitor was beeping faster, demanding attention. But if the time comes, if you need to remember who you really are, everything is in that chest. Ma, you are not making any sense, I insisted, panicking. She looked directly into my eyes, her focus unwavering. Promise me you will live simply, Silas, but remember who you are. The papers will explain everything. Those were her last coherent words. She passed 6 hours later, with Julian curled up on my lap and my hand still clutching hers. After the funeral, I found the oak chest exactly where she said it would be. It was heavy, maybe 30 inches square, secured with the leather straps and an ornate, untarnished brass lock. Written on the lid, in my mother's careful script, for Silas only, if necessary. I carried it to my small apartment and placed it under my bed. For 32 years, it stayed there. Through Julian's childhood, his high school graduation, college, his wedding, through every holiday dinner where Brielle made me feel insignificant. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at the spot, wondering what those documents contained, what my family had fled from, why my mother had chosen absolute secrecy over the truth. But I kept my promise. I lived simply, worked hard, and raised my son with the integrity of the working man. Only once was I truly tempted to open it. In 1999, Julian needed a specific summer study abroad program for college. The tuition was $14,000, and my savings fell short by $4,500. I lay awake for weeks, knowing that chest might hold the key, but I found another way. I took a second job driving a taxi on weekends for 7 months. My mother had said only if absolutely necessary. College tuition, apparently, was not necessary enough to break the promise. But something was different now. Brielle's public shaming in the grocery store. Julian's request that I hide my existence. The non-negotiable rent increase that would truly make me homeless. Maybe, just maybe, the time to remember was finally here. December 24th, 2024, 9:47 p.m. I parked my embarrassing old pickup truck in the lot of my embarrassing apartment complex, climbed the worn stairs to my embarrassing 500-square-foot home, and pulled out my mother's heavy oak memory chest. 32 years of promises. 32 years of living simply, of being the man Brielle thought she knew. Weak, poor, and disposable. I went to the kitchen and got a screwdriver to pry the old leather straps away. With a sharp crack, the straps gave way. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, I found my real life. The top document was a letter dated June 15th, 1983. The letterhead was crisp, Decker and Associates, International Trust and Fiduciary Advisors, Basel, Switzerland. Dear Mrs. Hawthorne, it began. Following your mother, Helga von Ritter's explicit instructions, we are writing to inform you that the von Ritter family trust and estate, awaiting your family's claim, has grown substantially. I read the next few sentences 3 times before the meaning could penetrate the fog of my tired mind. Estate settlement. Trust. The letter continued. Your son, Silas von Ritter Hawthorne, is the sole heir to the von Ritter holdings, valued at approximately 8.9 million Swiss francs as of this date. Per your mother's wishes, we have maintained the commercial property and investment portfolios in trust, awaiting contact from the family. 8.9 million francs in 1983. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I pulled out more papers. Quarterly asset statement from a prestigious Swiss financial institution showing continual growth through real estate leases and managed portfolios, all under the beneficiary name, Silas von Ritter Hawthorne. Next, photographs tumbled out. Black and white images of a sprawling, magnificent manor house built of pale stone, surrounded by vineyards and deep alpine woods. A family crest, a crowned white horse on a green field, was carved above the entryway. A newer, color photograph showed the same estate, immaculately restored and expanded. On the back, someone had written, Chateau von Ritter, Vaud, Switzerland. 17th century construction, 42 rooms, 400 acres maintained for American heir. American heir. More documents, property deeds, detailed investment breakdowns, and a meticulously drawn genealogy chart tracing the von Ritter family back to the late 1600s. At the very bottom of the chest was a sealed envelope, marked in my mother's frail handwriting, for Silas. Open only when ready. Inside, the letter was dated the day she died. My dearest son, it read. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. Your great-grandmother, Helga, was not a simple immigrant. She was Helga von Ritter, daughter of one of Switzerland's oldest, most respected banking and viticulture families. When the shadows of war began to fall across Europe, she fled with only the papers that would safeguard the family fortune for her descendants. She changed our name to Hawthorne, learned English, and never looked back. But the attorneys in Basel never forgot us. Every year they write. Every year they manage the estate. Every year the inheritance grows. I chose to ignore it because I wanted you to grow up American, working class, normal. I was terrified the money would change who you became. But you're a good man, Silas. You have proven that 1,000 times over. If the time comes when you need to remember who you truly are, you have every legal right to claim what is yours. The current contact is Mr. Elias Decker. His grandfather established the trust. He speaks perfect English and has been waiting to hear from you for decades. Choose carefully. Once you open that door, there's no going back. Love always, Mother. I stared at those papers, the magnitude of the truth burning through my exhaustion. Then I looked at the clock. 2:30 a.m., December 25th. 7:30 a.m. in Basel. I found Elias Decker's phone number in the files, a Swiss international number that had been waiting for my call for 41 years. My finger hovered over the dial button. Once you open that door, there's no going back. I thought about Brielle's voice, genetic baggage, antiquated worldview, ashamed. I thought about Julian's eyes, the shame I had seen there for me. I thought about Emmett and Clara learning to pity their grandfather. I dialed. 3 rings. 4. Decker and Associates. This is Elias Decker speaking. English with a smooth, professional Swiss accent. Mr. Decker, this is Silas Hawthorne calling from Ohio. Silence. Then, Silas Vaughn Ritter Hawthorne? Is it you? Yes. A sharp intake of breath. My God, we have waited for this call for decades. Are you well? Are you safe? Safe, I repeated. I am well, Mr. Decker. I found my mother's papers. Your mother was Evelyn Margaret Hawthorne, née Von Ritter. Yes. Mr. Hawthorne, I must ask you something crucial. Are you calling to inquire about your heritage, or are you calling to claim your inheritance? That was the question. I looked around my apartment. The peeling linoleum, the thrift store couch, the life Brielle found so disgusting. I'm calling to come home. Another pause. Home to Basel, sir? Yes. Mr. Hawthorne, there are legal protocols, of course, and document verification. But I can tell you that the principal has grown significantly since the 1983 valuation. How significantly? As of December 1st, the estate value was approximately 37 million Swiss francs, including the Chateau Von Ritter, which has been fully restored, the vineyards now leased to premium vintners, and investment portfolios managed by our most conservative advisors. 37 million francs. The number hung in the air, a final, absolute repudiation of everything Brielle had ever said about my financial incompetence. Mr. Decker, I asked, my voice steady now. How quickly can this happen? With DNA confirmation and document verification, 2 weeks, perhaps less if you can travel to Basel immediately. What if I told you I wanted to leave tomorrow? Christmas Day. Tomorrow? Christmas Day. Tomorrow. Then I would say, welcome home, Mr. Von Ritter, and I would ask why you waited so long. I looked out my apartment window at my embarrassing old truck under the flickering parking lot light. Because I forgot who I was, Mr. Decker. But I remember now. December 25th, Christmas morning, 6:30 a.m. While my son's family was unwrapping expensive gifts under a towering tree, I was booking a flight to Switzerland. Swiss International Airlines Flight 107, departing Cleveland Hopkins International at 6:45 p.m. One way, $1,450. I used my private savings account card, the one Brielle thought was restricted to its $500 limit. She did not know about the separate brokerage account I had been slowly building for 40 years, $78,200. Every tax refund, every overtime check, every small inheritance I had carefully rolled over. Money I saved for this kind of emergency. This was an emergency. At 7:15 a.m., I call my landlord. Mr. Peterson, Silas Hawthorne in Unit 302. I need to terminate my lease immediately. Silas? It is Christmas morning. I know. I'm leaving the country permanently. Check my lease agreement. 30 days notice or forfeit the security deposit. I am forfeiting the deposit. I will be out by noon. Where on earth are you going? Home, I said, and I hung up. Next call, First National Bank. Customer service. I was transferred to an emergency supervisor after explaining the critical nature of an international funds transfer. Mr. Hawthorne, I show a brokerage account with $78,200. You want to wire all of it? All of it. To UBS, Basel, Switzerland. Account number. I read from the documentation Elias Decker had immediately faxed to a print shop for me. Sir, this is highly unusual for Christmas morning. Ma'am, I replied, my entire life is about to become highly unusual. While the bank processed the transfer, I packed 2 suitcases, my clothes, photographs of Julian as a child, Eliza's wedding ring, and the empty oak memory chest. Everything else, the thrift store furniture, the chipped dishes, the bargain decorations, I left behind for whoever came next. At 11 a.m., I called Julian. It went straight to voicemail. Son, this is your father. By the time you hear this, I will be on a plane to Switzerland. There are things about our family you never knew, things your mother never told you. I have spent 40 years being the man you and Brielle thought I was, but that man was a fabrication. My real name is Silas von Ritter Hawthorne. I am the heir to a Swiss estate worth 37 million francs. Your great-grandmother was from Swiss nobility who fled during the Second World War. Brielle wanted me to remember who I am. Well, I remembered. I love you, Julian. I love Emmett and Clara. But I am finished being ashamed of myself to make your wife comfortable. When you are ready to introduce your children to their real grandfather, you know where to find me. I hung up and turned the phone off. At 12:30 p.m., I walked out of Maplewood Garden Apartments for the last time. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. My neighbor, Mrs. Al-Mansouri from 304, was in the hallway. Silas? You're moving out? Where to? Going home, Mrs. Al-Mansouri. But this is your home. No, I said gently. This was never home. This was just where I was waiting. At 2 p.m., I drove to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, parked my 15-year-old pickup in the long-term lot, and left the keys and the title in the glove compartment. I tape a note to the steering wheel. Free, running car. Title inside. Merry Christmas. Someone who needed transportation more than I did would eventually find it. At 4:30 p.m., I checked in for my flight. Traveling alone today, Mr. Hawthorne? The agent asked. For the first time in my life, I replied. She handed me my boarding pass. Have a wonderful trip. I'm going home. At 5:45 p.m., I sat at the departure gate, watching the other passengers. Families, business travelers, young couples. Nobody looked at me twice. Just another elderly man in discount clothes, flying economy to Zurich. They had no idea they were sitting next to a man who owned a chateau. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Julian. Dad, got your voicemail. This is insane. Call me back. I turned the phone off and put in the oak chest I was using as a carry-on bag. At 6:45 p.m., I boarded Swiss International Airlines Flight 107. The flight attendant, a woman who looked slightly older than Brielle, smiled as she checked my ticket. Welcome aboard, Mr. Hawthorne. Traveling for business or pleasure? Coming home, I said. She directed me to seat 29B, window seat. I pressed my face to the small window and watched Ohio disappear below me. The man Brielle had humiliated was gone forever. Silas Hawthorne, the poor old factory worker, had just ceased to exist. But Silas von Ritter Hawthorne was going home. December 20th, 3 weeks later. Brielle's firm's year-end celebration at Sterling and Reed Asset Management. I know this because Mr. Elias Decker, my Swiss attorney, sent me a digitized copy of the international news clippings and social media metrics. Brielle was networking with a powerful group of prospective clients, hedge fund managers, and major trust administrators when her junior associate, a young woman named Chelsea, rushed over, pale-faced, holding her phone. Mrs. Hawthorne, you need to see this, Chelsea whispered urgently. It is a LinkedIn notification. Brielle was in the middle of explaining to a potential client why her firm was perfectly positioned to manage their multi-million-dollar investments. Not now, Chelsea. This is crucial. Ma'am, it is about your father-in-law. Brielle's smile immediately faltered, hardening into irritation. My father-in-law is utterly irrelevant to Sterling and Reed. He is trending, ma'am, on every financial platform. Chelsea held up the phone. The screen displayed a profile. Silas von Ritter, Principal Director, Von Ritter Holdings, Switzerland. The profile showed 25,000 new connections in the last 72 hours. Brielle's face went instantly white. That is absolutely impossible. His name is Hawthorne. Ma'am, there's a major news article. Swiss Business Review. The client, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Victoria Chun, looked curious. Trending? On Swiss Business Review. Chelsea handed the phone over. Brielle's carefully constructed world collapsed in the headline. Lost American heir claims historic 37 million Swiss franc estate chateau, von Ritter returned to family hands. Dr. Chun leaned closer, reading the summary. 37 million francs? That is your husband's father. Brielle snatched the phone. The article was impossible to deny. There I was, Silas von Ritter Hawthorne, standing in front of the magnificent Chateau von Ritter, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, shaking hands with the mayor of Vaud, Mr. Alain Dubois. The von Ritter family crest, the crowned white horse, flew proudly behind us. The caption read, Silas von Ritter, 69, poses at his ancestral chateau after formally claiming his inheritance. The Detroit native spent 40 years concealing his identity as an American factory worker before returning to Switzerland to manage his family's historic viticulture and banking assets. Dr. Chen murmured, Von Ritter Holdings? I know that name. They are one of the most respected private trusts in the entire canton of Vaud. Brielle's hands were shaking as she scrolled through the details. The article explained that the family fled during the war, changing their name to Hawthorne to protect the assets. The estate, now valued at 37 million francs, included the historic chateau, 400 acres of high-yield vineyard leases, and investment portfolios managed by Decker and Associates since 1943. Chelsea pointed to the most damning paragraph. When asked why he waited so long to claim his inheritance, Mr. von Ritter replied, I promised my mother I would live simply until I absolutely needed to remember who I was. That time came when my family decided I was something to be profoundly ashamed of. The party had gone silent around them. 25 people, all members of Julian and Brielle's exclusive social and professional circle, were now listening intently to every word. Dr. Chin looked at Brielle with chilling clarity. You are married to Julian Hawthorne, the director of client relations here? Why, yes, Brielle whispered. So, finished Mr. Douglas Sterling, Brielle's managing partner, walking over with his own phone in hand. The man you have been calling a fossilized economic burden owns a European castle. Brielle's phone began to buzz, furiously text messages, financial alerts, private firm emails, all sharing the same Swiss Business Review article across multiple platforms. Douglas Sterling looked directly at Brielle. Brielle, did you not inform us that your father-in-law was, and I quote, an embarrassing example of poor financial management? The room was utterly silent. Brielle's phone rang. It was Julian. She backed away from the group, clutching the device. Julian, I have to take this. Vicky Brielle, have you seen the news? Julian's voice was strained, high-pitched. I'm looking at it now. It is some sort of mistake, Julian. A media stunt. It is not a stunt, Brielle. I just saw photos of him meeting with the Swiss National Bank officials. The mayor of Vaud issued a statement welcoming him home. And there is a separate trust fund established for Emmett and Claire, 750,000 francs each for their education and maintenance. Brielle felt physically sick. She saw Douglas Sterling and the senior partners heading toward a private office. Patrick, I have to go. My boss dash. Brielle, there is more. Julian interrupted desperately. The article includes specific quotes. Things you said about him. The source is quoted as being close to the immediate family. Her stomach bottomed out. What quotes? According to sources, Mr. von Ritter Hawthorne endured years of class-based humiliation, including being told he was genetic baggage and a blight on the neighborhood's aesthetics. It also mentions he was humiliated for using government assistance. Brielle's knees nearly buckled. Douglas Sterling opened his office door and gestured for her to enter. Zoe, he said, his voice deadly calm. Sit down. She sat heavily. I have just received calls from 3 separate, high-net-worth clients asking if you were the daughter-in-law mentioned in that article. Our firm's reputation, Brielle, is built on discretion, class, and respect for all levels of our client base. Richard, I can explain everything. It is a misunderstanding. Can you? Dr. Chun just informed me that she overheard you complaining about your embarrassing, impoverished father-in-law at the Sterling and Reed Charity Gala just last month. Furthermore, your social media presence is now an international cautionary tale. Brielle's face was burning with humiliation. Those sources are lying. Are they? Brielle, we manage money for people who value their reputation above all else. What does it say about your character that you spent 7 years intentionally humiliating a man who turned out to be the principal of a 37 million franc trust fund? The man you publicly shamed is now a major figure in the Swiss financial sector. Brielle's phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn notification. Silas von Ritter-Hawthorne has endorsed your skills in international asset management. She stared at the screen. He had professionally endorsed her from across the ocean. The man she had spent years calling genetic baggage was professionally recommending her on a platform where she desperately needed to save her reputation. It was the most exquisite form of silent, final revenge. Richard, I need to take some time off. I think that is an excellent idea, Brielle, Sterling said, folding his hands on his desk. A very long time off. Effective immediately. You are on administrative leave, pending a full review of your conduct and its impact on the firm's client relations. Brielle walked back out into the party. 25 people stopped talking instantly. Dr. Chen approached her with a business card. Brielle, when you speak to your father-in-law next, would you ask him if Von Ritter Holdings requires any American investment advisors? My firm would be exceptionally interested in representing someone of his caliber. Brielle took the card with numb fingers. The man she had exiled to the children's table was now being actively courted by the very social circle that had gleefully witnessed her downfall. The final piece of the collapse came a week later. Julian confessed that he had to sell the 4,000-square-foot house in Bloomfield Hills. The mortgage payments, combined with Brielle's sudden unemployment and the toxic scrutiny of their financial life, became unsustainable. He needed a fresh start, far away from the shame that Brielle had created. January 15th, 2025. I am recording this sitting in the morning room of Chateau Von Ritter. I am looking out over vineyards that my family has owned since before America was even a nation. This morning, I received 3 separate messages on my Swiss-issued secure line. The first was from Brielle. Silas, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. Julian and I would love to visit Basel with the children. We have always supported your decisions. Maybe we can start fresh. Start fresh. I deleted it without responding. Her apology was not about me. It was about the consequences to her. The second message was from my son, Julian. Dad, I have been thinking about what happened at Christmas. I should have stood up for you. Brielle was wrong. I was wrong. I miss you. Can we talk? That one I kept. It had the essential word, I. The third was from my granddaughter, Clara, dictated to Julian. Dear Grandpa, Daddy showed me pictures of your castle on his computer. It is beautiful. Can Emmett and I come visit you? I want to draw pictures of your vineyards. Love, Clara. I called Julian immediately. Hello, Dad. Hello, son. Silence, then a sigh. Dad, I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. I know you are. I should have defended you. All those years, I should have told Brielle to stop. You were protecting your marriage, Julian. I understand the pressure. No, Dad. I was protecting myself. I was embarrassed too. I let her version of you become the version I accepted. That honesty hurt, but I appreciated the sincerity. Julian, I want to see you. All of you. But things need to fundamentally change. Anything. What do you need? Respect. Not because of the 37 million francs, but because I am your father. And I want to see my grandchildren here at the chateau without Brielle manipulating every conversation, without her teaching them to pity their grandfather. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Dad, about Brielle. What about her? She is struggling since the news broke. Her firm put her on indefinite administrative leave. Our friends are asking questions. She is seeing a therapist. Good. I stated plainly. She needs therapy. She spent 7 years teaching my grandchildren shame. She wanted me to remember who I was. Now she needs to remember who she is. I'm not interested in her apologies, Julian. I am interested in her actions. What does that mean? I looked out at the rolling hills where the Swiss groundskeepers were pruning the dormant vines. It means your children are welcome here anytime. You're welcome here. But Brielle needs to prove she understands what she did wrong. She needs to demonstrate genuine change. How does she do that? That is not my problem to solve, son. That is hers. 3 days later, Julian arrived at Zurich Airport with Emmett and Clara. No Brielle. I hired a professional driver to pick them up in an expensive, comfortable sedan. Clara's eyes went wide when she saw it. Grandpa, is this your car? Emmett pressed his face to the window as we drove through the beautiful Swiss countryside. Grandpa, do you really live in a castle? I really do. I smiled. When we pulled through the stately gates of Chateau von Ritter, Julian's face was a mixture of absolute awe and genuine remorse. Dad, this is home. Elias Decker and the estate staff had prepared the place perfectly. Fresh flowers, new books, and games about Swiss history in the children's large bedrooms. Clara ran through the echoing stone halls, her 9-year-old voice blending with 4 centuries of family history. Grandpa, there are paintings of people who look just like you. Those are your ancestors, sweetheart. That evening, we ate dinner in the formal dining room. Julian and I, Emmett and Clara, and the mayor of Vaud, Mr. Du Bois, who has become a good friend. Your grandfather, the mayor told Emmett, is a celebrity here. Everyone wants to meet the American who came home to save our heritage. What does that mean? Emmett asked, fascinated. I looked at my grandson, 7 years old, sitting at a table where his ancestors had hosted royalty. It means sometimes people forget who they really are, sweetheart. But if they're lucky, they remember in time. Julian reached across the heavy table and squeezed my hand. Dad, I want the kids to spend every summer here, if that is all right with you. I want them to know this. That is more than all right. And I want to learn about our family, Julian continued, looking earnest. The real history. Will you teach me? I looked at my son, the man who had chosen silence, now choosing courage. Yes, son, I will teach you. Clara was drawing in her new art book tulips and the chateau and what looked like a grandfather and 2 children holding hands. Grandpa, she said without looking up. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy said you were poor, but you are not poor. No, Clara, I'm not poor. So why did she say that? Julian started to intervene, but I held up a hand. Sometimes, sweetheart, people judge what they can see instead of who someone really is. Your mother saw old clothes and an old car and thought that made me less important. She saw failure. That is silly, Clara declared. Yes, it is. Emmett looked up from his book about Swiss history. Grandpa, are you a king now? I laughed, the sound echoing lightly in the ancient room. No, Emmett. I'm just a grandfather who remembered he was worth respecting. That night, after the children were asleep, Julian and I sat in the study, overlooking the moonlit vineyards. Dad, Julian asked quietly, why did you wait? Why didn't you ever tell me? I showed him my mother's letter, explaining her fear that the money would corrupt my identity. Do you think she was right to wait? He asked. I thought about that for a long time. I think she was right to wait until I knew I could be a good man without money, Julian. You needed to see that too. And I needed to remember my own value before anyone else could define it. In Brielle, I think people can change, son, when they truly want to. But the question is whether Brielle wants to change or whether she just wants the consequences of her actions to stop. You need to decide if she understands the difference. Time will tell. If you're watching this, please subscribe and remember this. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not for sale. The person you underestimate might be exactly the person you need to learn the most profound lesson from. Sometimes the best revenge is simply remembering who you have always been. Brielle's world was a finely tuned machine of ambition and perception, and the annual Sterling and Reed celebration was its central operating theater. She was deep in a power networking conversation with a group of prospective clients, hedge fund managers and major trust administrators, when her junior associate, Chelsea, rushed over, pale-faced, holding her phone like a volatile device. Mrs. Hawthorne, you need to see this, Chelsea whispered urgently. It's a LinkedIn notification. Brielle, mid-explanation of her firm's superior positioning for multi-million-dollar investments, snapped. Not now, Chelsea. This is crucial. Ma'am, it's about your father-in-law. Brielle's professional smile faltered, hardening into irritation. My father-in-law is utterly irrelevant to Sterling and Reed. He's trending, ma'am, on every financial platform. Chelsea held up the phone. The screen displayed a profile. Silas von Ritter, Principal Director, Von Ritter Holdings, Switzerland. 25,000 new connections in 72 hours. Brielle's face went instantly white. That is absolutely impossible. His name is Hawthorne. Ma'am, a major article just broke. Swiss Business Review. The client, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Victoria Chun, leaned in, intrigued. Trending? On Swiss Business Review. Chelsea handed the phone over. Brielle's carefully constructed life collapsed into the headline. Lost American heir claims historic 37 million Swiss franc estate. Chateau von Ritter returned to family hands. Dr. Chen read the summary. 37 million francs? That is your husband's father. Brielle snatched the phone. The article was undeniable. There I was, Silas von Ritter Hawthorne, standing in front of the magnificent Chateau von Ritter, shaking hands with the mayor of Vaud. The von Ritter family crest, the crowned white horse, flew proudly behind us. The caption read, Silas von Ritter, 69, poses at his ancestral chateau after formally claiming his inheritance. The Detroit native spent 40 years concealing his identity as an American factory worker before returning to Switzerland to manage his family's historic viticulture and banking assets. Dr. Chen Mummelet, von Ritter Holdings. I know that name. One of the most respected private trusts in the canton of Vaud. Brielle's hands were shaking as she scrolled. The article detailed the family's flight during the war. The name changed to Hawthorne to protect the assets, and an estate valued at $37 million francs, including the historic chateau, vineyards, and portfolios managed by Decker and Associates. Chelsea pointed to the most damning paragraph. When asked why he waited so long to claim his inheritance, Mr. von Ritter replied, I promised my mother I would live simply until I absolutely needed to remember who I was. That time came when my family decided I was something to be profoundly ashamed of. The party had gone silent. 25 people, Julian and Brielle's exclusive circle, were listening. Dr. Chen looked at Brielle with chilling clarity. You are married to Julian Hawthorne, the director of client relations here? Why, yes, Brielle whispered. So, finished Mr. Douglas Sterling, Brielle's managing partner, walking over with his own phone in hand. The man you have been calling a fossilized economic burden owns a European castle. Brielle's phone began to buzz furiously, texts, financial alerts, firm emails, all sharing the same article. Douglas Sterling looked directly at her. Brielle, did you not inform us that your father-in-law was, and I quote, an embarrassing example of poor financial management? The room was utterly silent. Julian called. Brielle backed away, clutching the device. Julian, I have to take this. Vicky, Brielle, have you seen the news? Julian's voice was high-pitched with panic. It's a mistake, Julian. A media stunt. It's not. I just saw photos of him meeting with the Swiss National Bank officials. The mayor of Vaud issued a statement, and there's a separate trust fund established for Emmett and Clara, 750,000 francs each for their education. Brielle felt physically sick. She saw Sterling and the senior partners heading toward a private office. Brielle, there is more, Julian interrupted desperately. The article includes specific quotes. Things you said about him. The source is quoted as being close to the immediate family. Her stomach bottomed out. What quotes? It says Mr. von Ritter Hawthorne endured years of class-based humiliation, including being told he was genetic baggage and a blight on the neighborhood aesthetics. It also mentions he was humiliated for using government assistance. Brielle's knees nearly buckled. Douglas Sterling opened his office door and gestured for her to enter. Zoe, he said, using her birth name, his voice deadly calm. Sit down. She sat heavily. I have just received calls from 3 separate, high-net-worth clients asking if you are the daughter-in-law mentioned. Our firm's reputation, Brielle, is built on discretion and respect. Richard, it is a misunderstanding. Is it? Dr. Chun just informed me she overheard you complaining about your impoverished father-in-law at the gala last month. Furthermore, your social media presence is now an international cautionary tale. What does it say about your character that you spent 7 years intentionally humiliating a man who turned out to be the principal of a 37 million franc trust fund? Brielle's phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn notification. Silas von Ritter Hawthorne has endorsed your skills in international asset management. She stared at the screen. He had professionally endorsed her from across the ocean. The man she had exiled to the children's table was professionally recommending her on the platform where she desperately needed to save her reputation. It was the most exquisite form of silent, final revenge. Richard, I need to take some time off. I think that is an excellent idea, Brielle, Sterling said, folding his hands. A very long time off. Effective immediately. You are on administrative leave, pending a full review of your conduct. Brielle walked back out into the party. Silence descended instantly. Dr. Chun approached with a business card. Brielle, when you speak to your father-in-law next, would you ask him if Von Ritter Holdings requires any American investment advisors? My firm would be exceptionally interested in representing someone of his caliber. Brielle took the card with numb fingers. The man she had scorned was now being courted by the very circle that witnessed her downfall. The final collapse came a week later. Julian sold the 4,000-square-foot house in Bloomfield Hills. The mortgage, combined with Brielle's unemployment and the toxic scrutiny, became unsustainable. He needed a fresh start, far away from the shame she had created. I am recording this sitting in the morning room of Chateau Von Ritter, overlooking vineyards my family has owned for centuries. This morning, I received 3 messages on my Swiss-issued secure line. The first was from Brielle. Silas, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. Julian and I would love to visit Basel with the children. We have always supported your decisions. Maybe we can start fresh. Start fresh. I deleted it without responding. Her apology was about her consequences, not my dignity. The second was from my son, Julian. Dad, I've been thinking about what happened at Christmas. I should have stood up for you. Brielle was wrong. I was wrong. I miss you. Can we talk? That one I kept. It used the essential word, I. The third was from my granddaughter, Clara, dictated to Julian. Dear Grandpa, Daddy showed me pictures of your castle on his computer. It is beautiful. Can Emmett and I come visit you? I want to draw pictures of your vineyards. Love, Clara. I called Julian immediately. Hello, Dad. Hello, son. Silence. Then a deep sigh from him. Dad, I am sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. I know you are. I should have defended you. All those years, I should have told Brielle to stop. You were protecting yourself, Julian. You were embarrassed too. You let her version of me become the version you accepted. I was protecting myself. He confirmed the sincerity of balm. And that was the real failure. Julian, I want to see you. All of you. But things must fundamentally change. Anything. What do you need? Respect. Not because of the 37 million francs, but because I am your father. And I want my grandchildren here at the chateau, without Brielle manipulating every conversation, without her teaching them to pity their grandfather. Julian was quiet. Dad, about Brielle. She needs to remember who she is, I stated plainly. She wanted me to remember who I was. Now she must. I'm not interested in her apologies, Julian. I'm interested in her actions. What does that mean? I looked out at the rolling hills. It means your children are welcome here anytime. You're welcome here. But Brielle needs to prove she understands what she did wrong. She needs to demonstrate genuine change. How does she do that? That is not my problem to solve, son. That is hers. 3 days later, Julian arrived at Zurich Airport with Emmett and Clara. No Brielle. I hired an expensive sedan to pick them up. Clara's eyes went wide. Grandpa, is this your car? Emmett pressed his face to the window as we drove through the Swiss countryside. Grandpa, do you really live in a castle? I really do, I smiled. When we pulled through the stately gates, Julian's face was a mixture of awe and raw remorse. Dad, this is home. That evening, we ate dinner in the formal dining room with the mayor of Vaud, Mr. Dubois, who has become a good friend. Your grandfather, the mayor told Emmett, is a celebrity here. Everyone wants to meet the American who came home to save our heritage. What does that mean? Emmett asked. It means, I told him, looking at my 7-year-old grandson, that sometimes people forget who they really are, sweetheart. But if they are lucky, they remember in time. Julian reached across the heavy table and squeezed my hand. Dad, I want the kids to spend every summer here. I want them to know this. That is more than all right. And I want to learn about our family. Julian continued, looking earnest. The real history. Will you teach me? Yes, son. I will teach you. Clara was drawing in her new art book. Grandpa, she said without looking up. Mommy said you were poor. But you are not poor. No. Clara, I am not poor. So why did she say that? Julian started to intervene, but I held up a hand. Sometimes, sweetheart, people judge what they can see instead of who someone really is. Your mother saw old clothes and an old car and thought that made me less important. She saw a failure. That is silly, Clara declared. Yes, it is. Emmett looked up from his book. Grandpa, are you a king now? I laughed, the sound echoing lightly in the ancient room. No, Emmett. I am just a grandfather who remembered he was worth respecting. Later, sitting with Julian in the study, overlooking the moonlit vineyards, he asked quietly, Why did you wait? Why didn't you ever tell me? I showed him my mother's letter, explaining her fear that the money would corrupt my identity. I think she was right to wait, I concluded. She waited until I knew I could be a good man without money. Julian, you needed to see that too. And I needed to remember my own value before anyone else could define it. And Brielle, the question is whether Brielle wants to change or whether she just wants the consequences of her actions to stop. You need to decide if she understands the difference. Time will tell.